So, today we're going to talk about why I decided to launch a podcast and a newsletter. So, as you might have already known, I just launched my newsletter called Update Night last week, and the support has been pretty amazing. We've got quite a couple of subscribers, but not as many as I expected. But hopefully, that will be on the rise soon. And if you have not subscribed yet, do go to updatenight.com right now and you can go ahead, drop in your email address. You'll receive a weekly issue of the latest tech news that people don't talk about, because that's the whole point of the newsletter. We cover all the stories and tools, resources, news that people don't talk about in the headlines, because we are only going into those low-lying stories that don't make the big headlines. Of course, we will also touch on a little bit of like the most breaking stories in that week as well, so you don't actually miss out on anything. So you've pretty much got nothing to lose if you subscribe to that newsletter, which is called Update Night. Once again, it's updatenight.com. And I've just launched a podcast yesterday, which is also called Update Night, but this is called the Update Night podcast. So this podcast is a new weekly. I haven't decided exactly what is the schedule yet, but I think we're gonna go with a weekly kind of schedule. So we are making this podcast an extension to the Update Night newsletter. So if you are already a fan or you're enjoying what we are putting out for Update Night, you will definitely enjoy the Update Night podcast as well, because this will be a completely auditory format where all of the news and resources and the stories that I share on Update Night will all also be shared on the podcast as well. But this will be an extended format where we actually go very deep in depth into some of the items and what is actually the real impact of some of the things, some of the stories that we are discussing about in that week's newsletter. And of course, we will also touch on some of the personal stories as well from my personal experiences from building my tech startup here in Singapore. So you'll find that in the newsletter as well, and as well as the podcast. So if you are a person who don't likes to read, you will definitely love the podcast a lot more. Personally, I just find it very productive if you read a Kindle, read a book, or you actually listen to podcasts while you are traveling. That which is like the most waste of time when you have to go to like a very far end of like the country for work or for school. You can use that specific time every day, just 1 hour every day. You don't even have to like do it, go there and come back, do it twice. You can even just do it once for just 1 hour, read a book, listen to a podcast, and that will be the most productive time that you will use, rather than like scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, and whatever social media platforms on that time. It's such a short time, but also such a long time for you to be doing something productive, because I don't like doing work on the train or on the bus. And listening to podcasts, reading a book, that is such a great use of time when there's nothing you can do about it, that you already have to spend the time to travel to school, to work. And you just make use of this time to read a book, listen to a podcast. It will be amazing. Just 1 hour a day. 1 week alone, 5 days is just 5 hours of reading or listening to podcasts. And if you are doing like both at once, it's insane. Like, I don't know if you can do that kind of level of multitasking, but definitely if you listen to the Update Night podcast, you can catch up on the latest news for the last week, and you will definitely not miss out on anything. Just listening to the podcast while you are traveling. Maybe you can do some other things while you are listening to the podcast. Just look around, observe your surroundings. It's a really good use of what you have at your disposal in your smartphones. You just need your headphones, listen to the podcast. You won't miss out on anything big, anything that's undercovered in the tech field. It will be in the Update Night podcast. So I've not decided whether it'll be like a weekly or a monthly schedule yet. So we will have to see that for now. So currently we are doing in this kind of format. This is what the Update Night newsletter and the Update Night podcast is all about. So moving on to the reason why I actually decided to start a newsletter and a podcast. So very long ago, when I was really young, I just really loved those very back then. YouTube was quite new, so there were people already doing like podcasts, whereas like now it's actually very mainstream. Everyone is like doing their own podcast as well, so it's not very not rare anymore. It's very common nowadays to have podcasts everywhere, and I feel like I'm providing a lot of value here by giving you the tech news in a podcast format, because I'm doing all the heavy lifting here in this podcast and newsletters for you to read and listen, and it's completely for free. How is this even for free in the first place? Nothing. I'm not even charging anything for any of the content I'm putting out here on YouTube. Neither am I charging for any of the content I'll be putting out on the Update Night newsletter and the podcast. So all of it is completely free. The podcast is available on Spotify and a new YouTube channel that I just launched, which is called the Update Night Podcast. You can just search it up on YouTube and it will be the very first result that you see. On Spotify, you can just search Update Night. It will definitely be one of the top few search results that you'll see on Spotify. So definitely give a follow and subscribe to both of these platforms and you will be notified. Turn on the notifications and you'll be notified on the next release. So you can also listen to the podcast on our updatenight.com newsletter as well. Each of the podcast episodes will also be uploaded on the updatenight.com website. So definitely so many available platforms for you to listen, to view the latest news. I've been thinking of like making like a YouTube format for the tech news as well, but I'm not too sure yet. Maybe I will do like a specific video for a different specific kind of tool or some very breaking story, something I need to cover. Maybe share some of my personal raw thoughts, unfiltered thoughts on it. And maybe some of the great tools like the new TikTok IDE that ByteDance just released. Maybe I can make a video on that rather than like a full-fledged compilation of a tech news video. That might be not as interesting because I'm already doing like two formats here, and adding just another format for the YouTube channel might be a bit boring. So definitely if you want to catch up on the news content, it will only right now, currently, it will only be available on the newsletter and the podcast. I will not touch most of it on the channel here, but you will definitely expect to see a lot more nicer content, more regular kind of content in terms of covering all these nitpicks tools, or some testing my raw thoughts, some of my unfiltered thoughts and what I think of certain tools and news and the impact on this channel as well. So that will really depend on the item that we will be looking at. So it won't be everything. So back to why I decided to start a newsletter and a podcast, because I actually started a Discord community last year, which is called Division Null. So this Discord community is a place where we share tech discoveries like these tools that we are sharing here and the news. And these things are not really covered generally by the headlines because it's very under covered and people don't really know about it. It's considered like sort of like a hidden gem of the tech world. So we are actually ungatekeeping it and just compiling it, condensing it into this one giant place called Division Now, which is a Discord community where everyone shares their really interesting tech discoveries into the Discord server. So this is a really great project that I made last year, at the end of the last year. So really proud of that. We are at around 80 plus members right now, but not as active as I thought. So it's not really the main point, because the whole point because I started Division Now is because I kept coming across all these discoveries and I just wanted to have a space where I can share all of these discoveries in this channel that I have, which is called the Division Now Discord server right now. This will not go away. This will still be there, but this Update Night podcast and newsletter was born because of that, because I thought that could be a lot more potential in terms of compiling into a very nice, condensable, readable, consumable format for our viewers and listeners to consume the tech news and the things we find on the Discord server for that week. So we'll just filter the most interesting finds that we have from that week and the news, and we'll just compile it into the update night newsletter issues, weekly issues, and the podcast as well. So of course, I haven't decided whether the podcast will be in like a monthly format or a weekly format. If we do it like a monthly format, it will be like the whole month's tech news kind of recap, and that might cascade into like a very long kind of podcast if there's like too many things going on. Especially in the first podcast episode alone, there's so many news to cover, and even the newsletter, it took like so long to write out that article. So not sure yet, but I think I'm leaning towards a weekly kind of format. So it depends on my workload as well, and we will see just how everything goes. So just keep an eye lookout for the upcoming releases on the newsletter and the podcast. So I really wanted to like start a podcast and a newsletter when I was young, because seeing all these YouTubers back then starting their own podcast and just talking about random things or like a specific thing that they like, it's very interesting. Like, it's a space where you can just pour out your thoughts without no filter. There's no, like, you don't need the perfection of like canceling out like words or whatever you say. It's just very flow. It's a very normal flow, and you don't even have to edit it. It's a good space to pour out your thoughts, and it's a really good format, and there's nothing to see. You just listen to the podcast. And for the viewers, I think for the viewers, as a viewer, as a listener myself, I would find the voice of people using like really professional mics in a podcast very soothing and nice to listen to. And some of them like are so soothing that it makes you sleep. So hopefully this will be a very good podcast launch, and I really recommend you to listen to the podcast while you are free, while you are just doing your chores or you're just resting on the couch. If you have nothing to do, just listen to the podcast. If you want to catch up on the latest news without having to do all the hard work coming across the different social media platforms, seeing on Reddit, seeing it on the news, I really would say a lot of these things that we find here are not, you can't find it anywhere, because these are like, a lot of the tools that we find are so undercovered, and some of them relatively new. You really wouldn't like notice them until like we actually share it here. So this is really the place, the hub, the division Null, the update night newsletter. It's really like we are making like a very tight-knit hub but it's still open to making it accessible to like everyone to really come together. It's a place for everyone to share what they find, and it's becoming this place where we are really having the latest tech, groundbreaking, the latest innovative technologies that we are finding, and it's really great to be at the front seat to really try out some of these really new tools, like the new TikTok IDE that ByteDance just released. And honestly, if the big headlines weren't covering it, you probably won't find it anywhere. But this was actually one of the items that was floating around the community. So I wouldn't say it's like a complete secret. So we do have like really nitpicked finds from like the tech community that we are actually sharing here. So I do really recommend like following our podcast and our newsletter. So when I was young, I really wanted to start a podcast, but I just really didn't know like what podcasts, what should I talk about? What should we talk about? Like, is it about life? For the newsletter, like, what do we share? Like, is there something special that I can do, just specially me, that I can do to share and provide value to the world here, right, through this newsletter and podcast channel that we have right now? So it just came to me that this division now, it was just a very random idea that I had, because I was just keep coming across all these finds all over the place, everywhere. I'm just sharing with my friends. So this became a place where it's like a very centered hub to share all these finds. So this then evolved into the next idea, which I decided to make it into a very podcast, into a newsletter and a podcast format, where we can share all these things in a compact format, because there was some feedback on the Discord server that it was a bit cluttered and very disorganized, because all the links were just placed just copy and paste it into the different channels, and it's categorized into different channels, but it's still very hard to like find the things that you want, and it's a bit hard to realize like what is like the latest thing here. Once I read it, it's gone. So they don't know what is like the latest thing that they should look out for. So this new channel, the Update Night podcast and the newsletter, has become this place where we actually talk about all these things in a lot more detail rather than the division. Now we're just copy and pasting links to share. So this is a lot more about discussion and around the impact, what is it all about, and really why you should be using it in your next project or why you should be using it in your workflow. So it has become an idea, and we actually turn it into a reality. Last week we launched the newsletter and we launched the podcast today. So pretty interesting. I think it's quite incredible that I still can't believe it that we have a podcast now and a newsletter that people can read on a weekly basis. People can listen to our podcast on a weekly basis as well. Pretty incredible. I can't wait for more to come. So really excited for what's more to come for this Update Night channel that we are creating here. So continue to support what my other projects like the Update Night here and my YouTube channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. We will also be launching something big on February the 14th, so definitely don't miss out on that. This will be a very big launch. I'm so excited for that. It's the biggest launch. It's bigger than this Update Night launch. Very excited for what's to come on February the 14th. This is not the end. This is just the beginning. So really excited for what's to come on February the 14th. It's called Supply the Future. Check it out on supply.tf right now. It's counting down to February the 14th at 5 p.m. Singapore time. So that's all we have for today. This is why I started a podcast and a newsletter. I really hope this provides value to everyone out there who's listening and reading to the Update Night newsletter and podcast. Really hope you enjoy it. Do give us some feedback if you want, like maybe if there's anything you want us to improve on it. Maybe if you have any hosts you want us to host on our podcast, we can get some third-party opinions, second thoughts on some of the topics that we could discuss as well, or maybe insight into some of the different fields, and maybe not just specifically tech, but in some of the different tech fields in the other industries, maybe finance, something like that. Some guests to get us joined on our upcoming podcast episodes as well. So definitely let us know what you would like, what content you would like to see. A lot of content has been planned out already just for this channel alone, and for the Update Night channel as well. So hope you have enjoyed what we are putting out so far. It's a lot of effort and work to maintain all of these for like on a weekly basis. So really hope this is providing value, and I hope we do see some results soon. But nevertheless, it's something that I like to do, doing all these podcasts, writing the news articles, the issues. It's quite correlated to my personal identity of what I really like to do. So it's not really like, it doesn't sound like a chore yet. So I hope I don't burn out soon as well. So hopefully I can continue pushing out content on a weekly basis on this YouTube channel as well. So you can expect a lot of content from now on, from the YouTube channel, the podcast, and the upcoming launch on February the 14th. So that's all. No outro again.